Hello, America, and to our friends around the world, greetings. Recently, I became aware of a situation. I don't know what your opinion is of it, but there's a thing called paternity fraud. And you would think that something labeled as fraud would be considered at least a Class A misdemeanor, if not a felony level form of fraud. But in many regions, it's not even considered a crime, meaning it's not even considered a misdemeanor. Now, what is paternity fraud? Paternity fraud is when someone, most often a man, is deceived into believing either through threat of force of the state or by duplicity of another individual, most often a woman, that a child is their biological and or legal responsibility. That's not the legal definition, that's not the dictionary definition, but it is a simple definition. And today's story deals with a case of genetic fraud. And I will tell you right off the bat, I've had debates with people, and I don't take them very seriously because number one, I'm I'm not an expert in the field, but I am more educated than those who have. I'm more educated on the matter than most people, but those who have actually experienced are most often the most rapidly educated by necessity. There was a man in Georgia, I believe, and let's see. Well, it doesn't say where he's at least not in the immediate reading through. His name is Carnell Smith. He is a nationally recognized expert in paternity fraud and the executive director of the United States Citizens Against Paternity Fraud. He is also the board president and executive director of the National Family Justice Association. Smith is an international spokesman on paternity fraud, family law, and DNA testing issues, and he frequently appears on radio and television shows such as the CBS Early Show, ABC World News, and the Abrams Report. In addition to that, an individual that he and I both follow each other on X. Mr. Smith and I follow each other, as well as another individual, Bill Corbitt, Vet Father Bill, on X, and we communicate from time to time, Vet Father Bill and I, and then Bill Corbitt told me that he's met with Mr. Smith about this topic in the past, as well as other, issues relating to men. But let me finish up reading this. All right, so I left off. Smith has been quoted in major newspapers, including USA Today, the Washington Times, Orlando Sentinel, the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Star Tribune. He has addressed U.S. legislative hearings and spoken at events like the Administration for Children and Families and the National Men's Equality Congress. Smith's personal experience with paternity fraud began when he discovered through DNA testing that he was not the biological father of a child he had been raising and supporting financially. This experience motivated him to become an advocate for victims of paternity fraud and push for legal reforms. Smith has been involved in raising awareness about paternity fraud through various media outlets and has contributed to TV, radio, podcasts, newspapers, magazines, and film projects worldwide. He's written at least one book, if not more, and I haven't had a chance to read it, but it is on my list, but it requires being able to obtain it. And um, I am cheap. I like to acquire my books by as low a cost as possible. preferably through the library, and the library doesn't like to stock books that are self-published. And because it's a men's related issue, Mr. Smith's book doesn't get published in the normal manner, the normal ways, the normal manner that one is often associated with book publishing. And it is my desire that Mr. Smith should actually get his dime for the work that he's put into not only writing this book, but his experience. Mr. Smith actually was ordered to pay by a court who disregarded the DNA evidence and said, we don't care. And the motivation behind that is because the courts receive financial incentives. It's a bonus payout system that the courts and the judges get for making high financial debt obligation orders. And that is what Mr. Smith was fighting against, a corrupt, just us, not a justice, but just as in JUST hyphen US system that is, as I said, very corrupt. All right. So why do I talk about all this? Because paternity fraud doesn't just hurt, in this case, men, specifically, fathers, or men who have been accused of being fathers, nor does this actually deal with specifically the legislation that a lot of states are trying to push to make what's called prenatal child support, where all it takes is the allegation without evidence from a woman to put a man on the financial hook for that 8-9 months of prenatal child support, and then to pay to the court additional money to undo the damage without financial remedy or recourse against the woman who made the false allegation. That is wrong. She needs to be in prison if she can't pay back every red cent with 20+% interest or higher, as well as all of his legal expenses and every publication that's ever, pay for their posting of retractions of every smear and slander and libel that they've ever promoted about that individual. All right. So at this point, you're having an emotional, visceral reaction of, well, that's his own fault. Paternity fraud doesn't just affect men, it impacts children. Don't believe me? Woman sues fertility clinic saying she gave birth to another patient's baby. That's right. A woman became a victim of genetic fraud. I'm not certain whether to call it paternity fraud or maternity fraud, but regardless, this feminist decided to get knocked up by IVF, in vitro fertilization, and was led to believe that the egg she was being inseminated with or implanted with after insemination was her egg. Krystena Murray became pregnant after undergoing in vitro fertilization 2 years ago, said she was unaware until she gave birth that the clinic made a fateful mistake. The name of the clinic is Coastal Fertility Specialists. You may have heard about them in the news. This came out in the middle of February of this year, but this happened back in 2023. And as I've said, March is Women's Month. And I wanted to throw this one in as a teaser about women who abuse the system, women who get away with literal murder and child abuse. And in this case, I wanted to present a case of a woman being duped by her own arrogance and claiming the position of victim for her own narcissism, trying to beat nature, trying to beat biology. Let's be serious. Up until the revelation that this is a woman that had been the victim, how many of you didn't give any concern nor regard to the fact of Mr. Smith's experience or that of other men who have been the victims of paternity fraud? I'm willing to bet the majority of you, man or woman, didn't care. But now that you're finding out that it's a woman, oh, your hypocrisy's showing. And I'm not saying that to shame my listening audience, but to put it out there, you need to own being a hypocrite. And if you were willing to have empathy towards the victim, regardless of gender, then kudos for you. I wasn't sure how I wanted to play this, but I definitely wanted to make certain to be as uh, you know, as fuzzy as possible leading into this, but the thumbnail may defeat my intentions. Regardless, Murray resolved to raise the child, but after reporting the mix up to the clinic, its staff tracked down and notified the legitimate parents and let them know, and they demanded custody of their child that was being carried unknowingly by a surrogate. So this woman paid tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, essentially to be another couple's surrogate. She was financially defrauded. And I don't know what the outcome is with this case, but apparently from the article, and I became aware of this because of Manhood Highlights Daily from their March 25 video. All right, Mary delivered a healthy baby boy, but knew immediately because that it wasn't hers because she's white, baby was black. All right. So what if it had been a white child? She could have gone years without knowing. So when you find out or hear about legislation about prenatal child support or efforts to shame men who want paternity testing, DNA testing to become at least optional, and that they have the ability to withdraw parental consent pending the results. Keep these things in mind because these things, you're going to see them more frequent. So, Savannah filed, Murray of Savannah, Georgia, filed a lawsuit. Look at the fact that this is happening in the Southeast. Carnell Smith, Bill Corbitt with his men, trying to get a men's shelter. Carnell Smith with paternity fraud, and now this woman in Savannah, Georgia. There's a lot of this happening in this region. Tennessee is trying to correct for this, Georgia, obviously. So, coastal fertility specialists alleging clinics, the suit has them alleging that they were negligent in the suit, mixing up embryos, never felt so violated, and the situation has left me emotionally and physically broken. That is something you hear from men often who have been the victims of paternity fraud. I knew a man who had been duped not once but twice in his relationship. He, he let his life go to crap. It was pathetic to see. I have no idea what happened to him. I don't think he ever is going to recover. I don't think he has the intellect to do it. That being said, I don't think it should be incumbent upon one to have the intellect or the emotional fortitude to have to persevere and suffer a tragedy such as that in order to just survive. If you're a victim of paternity fraud, there needs to be criminal prosecution against the state, against the woman making the false allegation. There's an easy solution to it. It's called keeping your legs closed and keeping your fly zipped. And many people shame men for not keeping their fly zipped, but we don't shame women to keep their legs closed. That needs to turn around with this type of stuff happening more and more often. Medical practice apologized in an emailed statement for what it called unprecedented error that resulted in an embryo transfer mix-ups. Said the staff adopted new safeguards to prevent similar mistakes from happening in the future. So I don't want to bore you with 4 more pages worth of slides. I will include them and you can pause it and read it yourself or follow the link and read the article for yourself that's archived. But bottom line is she's going to go back and do it again through a different IVF facility. She has an attorney who's representing her. And as I said, I wanted to do this as a twist of nobody cares that it happens to men. But if it happens to women, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. And that's called being a hypocrite. And if you're guilty of that, you can follow along with the Hung by the Tongue by what's his name? Francis something? Francis P. Martin that I'm reading that I'll be uploading today and tomorrow. So have empathy for those who are suffering through it and help them write letters to the legislatures, to their House of Representatives, the state level representatives for their, if you live in Nebraska, it's a single, assembly, and there's at least one or two other states there's just that, but most other states have what's called bicameral, which means there's a Senate and a House of Representatives or an assembly. Write to the representatives of your district and can't help them campaign to get this stuff turned around, because now you're finding out women are going to be victims of this genetic fraud. So everybody dismissed it because it was men. Then people recognized it's not just harming men, it is harming the children who found out that the men that have been on the hook, whom they resented because of the child support or that they thought was their dad raising them, they now resent their mother for lying for decades. And if that wasn't enough to pull at your heartstrings, now you have feminist women who are too strong and independent to figure out how to get married, who are now becoming victims of the genetic fraud. Children deserve better. Individuals deserve to have their dignity and not be treated as a pay pig, no matter what Louisiana representative and U.S. House Speaker, ballless cuckold Mike Johnson says.